It was a Saturday morning, the kind where the sky still held a misty veil and the coffee hadn't quite settled in my veins. Lisa was in the kitchen, quietly preparing breakfast. Everything seemed normal, but something had been off lately. We were living what looked like the perfect marriage from the outside. Decent house, successful careers, the occasional weekend getaway. But the invisible tension between us had been growing for months, and I couldn't place my finger on it. I'd been hearing whispers, harmless jokes from friends, Lisa making more solo trips under the pretense of girls' nights, and a lingering distance when we were alone. There was no explosive argument or dramatic shift in routine, just the subtle erosion of trust that seeps in when something is wrong. That morning, I had to make a quick stop at her home office. I was looking for a pen, some paperwork that I'd left there weeks ago. Her desk was always a mess, cluttered with papers from her job as a real estate broker. But this time, something caught my eye. A crisp white envelope, perfectly placed atop the chaos. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but its cleanliness was out of place among the disarray. Curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it, expecting to find some routine contract. But what I found sent a chill through my body. The document inside was no real estate agreement. It was a contract. But not just any contract. It was an agreement that Lisa had signed with some lawyer, detailing that she would divorce me for the sum of $33,000. My eyes scanned the paragraphs faster than my mind could comprehend. And then I saw it, a clause that mentioned an additional $5,000 payment for starring in a personal video production. The term porn wasn't explicitly mentioned, but the nature of the agreement made it clear. She had agreed to sell our marriage, our life together, for a sum of money that suddenly felt all too insignificant. $33,000 for a divorce. $5,000 to make a video that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I stood there thinking. My heart raced, but the rest of me felt paralyzed, like a stone statue watching its world crumble. Why would she do this? Was our life together so worthless to her? The thought of Lisa, my wife, in such a cold transaction was more than I could process. I folded the paper back into the envelope and put it exactly where I had found it. Then I walked out, not daring to confront her yet. I needed to know more, to understand why this was happening before making any rash decisions. It was a feeling of betrayal unlike any I had ever felt before. Lisa didn't notice the change in my demeanor when I returned to the kitchen. She was busy humming softly to herself, a calmness that only made me feel sicker inside. I wondered how long she had been planning this, how many lies she had told without breaking a sweat. I sat down at the breakfast table, trying to act natural, but the eggs on my plate tasted like dust. Over the next few days, I became a stranger in my own home. I watched her more closely, listening for any slip-ups, any signs that she knew what I had found. It became an obsession, studying her every move, analyzing her every word, all while pretending that I didn't know the ticking bomb that sat on her desk. That weekend, we had a dinner party at our neighbor's place. The usual crowd, mostly couples we'd known for years, sharing drinks, jokes, and casual gossip. Lisa played her role perfectly, laughing at the right moments, holding my hand when someone made a joke about the perfect couple. It was sickening to watch, knowing what I now knew. As the night wore on, Lisa disappeared for a moment to the restroom. I took the opportunity to step outside, trying to clear my head. The cool air stung my skin, but it did little to numb the turmoil inside me. That's when I saw her across the room, talking quietly to a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, sharply dressed, with an air of confidence that made him stand out from the crowd. They were too close, too familiar. My heart sank as I wondered if this was the man behind the $5,000 clause. When she returned, her eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I could have sworn I saw a flicker of guilt, quickly masked by her usual smile. I decided then that I needed to confront her soon, but not without more proof. There was more to this story, and I wasn't going to let her blindside me. Back at home that night, I lay awake next to her, listening to her steady breathing. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. How long had this been going on? Did she still care for me, or had our entire marriage been a lie? What could have pushed her to sign away our life for such a pitiful amount of money? I needed answers, but the time wasn't right. Not yet. Tomorrow, I would dig deeper into the contract and find out who else was involved. I wouldn't confront her until I had everything. She would have no room for denial, no escape when the truth came out. But until then, I had to play the part of the loving husband, just as she had been playing the part of the perfect wife. The storm was coming, and I wasn't sure if either of us would survive it intact. I woke up the next morning feeling drained, as if the weight of the world had settled on my chest overnight. Lisa was still asleep beside me, her face peaceful, almost innocent, if I hadn't known better. But I did know better now. The memory of the contract I had found the previous day flooded back like a tidal wave. Every breath I took seemed heavier, laden with the bitter taste of betrayal. I couldn't let it go. I needed to see it again, to make sure I hadn't imagined it all. I had to know if what I had found was truly real. Lisa had left early that morning for a yoga class, one of her regular escapes that I now suspected had more to it than met the eye. The moment she left the house, I rushed to her office. The envelope was still there, untouched, right where I had placed it the day before. I pulled out the contract again, and this time I read it slowly, letting every word sink in. The details were chilling. Lisa had agreed to divorce me for $33,000, a sum that seemed so insignificant compared to what we had built together over the years. And then there was that $5,000 clause, payment for starring in a video. My stomach turned as I considered what that entailed. My mind buzzed with questions. Who had proposed this deal? Why $33,000? Was this really all my marriage had come to? I scanned the bottom of the contract again, my eyes lingering on the signature. Lisa's name was there, but right next to it was another signature, one I didn't recognize. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the document. I needed more than just my suspicions now. I needed hard evidence, something to confront her with when the time came. But who was this other person? The lawyer? Someone else pulling the strings behind the scenes? My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to dig further. Maybe this contract had more clues than I'd realized at first glance. I rifled through the stack of papers on her desk, trying to piece together the puzzle. That's when I found it. A business card, half hidden beneath a pile of old receipts and to-do lists. The card was from a man named Greg Sullivan, a local attorney who specialized in alternative contracts. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. There was nothing innocent about this deal, nothing straightforward about what was happening. I'd never heard of Greg Sullivan before, but something told me he was more than just an attorney. I stuffed the card into my pocket and continued my search. I couldn't shake the image of Lisa's signature on that document, her name in cold ink sealing a deal that would shatter our lives. The $5,000 video clause kept replaying in my mind. The thought of my wife reducing herself to something so degrading for such a pitiful sum made my blood boil. Who was this for? Was it for the same man I had seen her with at the party, or was it someone else? The questions swirled endlessly, pushing me closer to the edge. I felt like a detective piecing together clues from a crime scene, but this wasn't some distant case. It was my life, my marriage, my future. Every discovery cut deeper, but I couldn't stop. I had to know everything before I confronted her. The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions, work, emails, a couple of meetings. But my mind was elsewhere, always circling back to the contract and the implications it carried. I thought about calling her, confronting her right then and there, but something held me back. I needed more than anger. I needed to understand why she had done this, how long this had been going on, and most importantly, what her next move was going to be. That evening, Lisa came home later than usual. She claimed she had stopped by her sister's place for a quick chat after yoga, but there was something off about her. I watched her closely as she moved through the house, acting as though nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek like always, asked about my day, and then went to take a shower. It was all so normal, and yet, I couldn't look at her without seeing the contract flashing before my eyes. As the water ran in the bathroom, I stood outside the door, wrestling with the urge to barge in and confront her. But I stopped myself. Not yet. I still didn't have enough. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the picture of the contract. I scrolled through my contacts, searching for someone who might help me understand what I was dealing with. I needed to know more about this Greg Sullivan. A quick search online revealed he wasn't just a run-of-the-mill lawyer. He had a reputation for handling discreet, off-the-books arrangements. His client list was a mix of wealthy businesspeople and apparently those seeking certain services. Something about this man didn't sit right with me. I dug deeper into his background and sure enough, there were whispers of darker dealings. Contracts like the one Lisa had signed, transactions where marriages were treated like business deals, and sometimes worse. As I scrolled through the articles, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. It was as if I was tumbling down a rabbit hole of deceit, with Lisa pulling the strings behind the scenes. I had no idea how deep this would go, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just about money anymore. This was something darker. Later that night, as Lisa curled up next to me in bed, I could feel the distance between us like a chasm. She had no idea that I knew. She still believed she could carry on her facade for a little longer, but I was already steps ahead, building my case, planning my next move. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I would finally confront her. Tomorrow? Next week? The clock was ticking, and each passing day made the betrayal feel heavier, more suffocating. Tomorrow, I would visit Greg Sullivan's office and see if he could explain this sordid contract. Maybe I could catch Lisa in her lies before she had a chance to twist the truth. One thing was certain: my marriage as I knew it was over. Now, I just had to find a way to unravel the rest of this nightmare before it consumed me whole. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I had a plan now. I would visit Greg Sullivan, the man whose name was scrawled across the contract that had shattered my sense of reality. But first, I had to slip out of the house without raising suspicion. Lisa was already awake, sitting in the kitchen sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone like it was just another day. She smiled when she saw me, her eyes soft and untroubled, as if she wasn't hiding a massive secret. "Good morning, honey," she said, her voice light, no tremor of guilt in it. "Any plans for the day?" I forced a smile, pretending like the rage bubbling inside me wasn't ready to explode. "Just running some errands, work stuff," I replied, trying to sound as casual as I could. "Might stop by the office for a bit." "Busy day, huh? Well, don't work too hard. We could do something tonight if you're free," she added, her tone sweet, but it felt like poison. Every word she spoke now seemed laced with lies, a mask she wore effortlessly. "Yeah, maybe," I said, barely able to maintain the facade. My mind was already spinning with the possibilities of what I would uncover today. I grabbed my keys and left the house, my heart pounding faster with every step away from her. As I drove through the city streets, I kept replaying the last few months in my head. Lisa had been distant, sure, but this was beyond what I ever could have imagined. She had turned our marriage into a commodity, something to be sold, as if our years together had meant nothing. Greg Sullivan's office was tucked away in a sleek, modern building in the business district. From the outside, it looked like just another law firm, but I knew there was something more beneath the polished surface. I parked and made my way inside, my mind racing with the questions I needed to ask, the truths I needed to unearth. Inside the lobby, I was greeted by a receptionist who smiled politely as I approached. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone professional. "No, but I need to speak with Greg Sullivan." "It's urgent," I replied, trying to keep the tension out of my voice. She eyed me for a moment, probably trying to gauge if I was just another walk-in client or someone with serious business. After what felt like an eternity, she picked up the phone and made a quick call. A moment later, she looked up and nodded. "Mr. Sullivan will see you now," she said, pointing me toward the door at the end of the hall. I walked down the corridor, my footsteps echoing in the quiet space. When I reached the door, I took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened to reveal Greg Sullivan, a tall man with slicked-back hair and sharp features. He was the kind of man who exuded control, the type who thrived on power and secrecy. "Come in," he said, his voice calm, as if he had been expecting me all along. I stepped inside, my eyes quickly scanning the room. It was minimalistic, with sleek black furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city skyline. Sullivan gestured for me to sit, and I did, though every muscle in my body was tense. "So, what can I do for you?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me, his expression unreadable. "I found a contract," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. A contract my wife signed. You drafted it. For the first time, his expression shifted, just slightly. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't speak, waiting for me to continue. It states that she's agreed to divorce me for $33,000, and there's an additional clause, something about her making a video for another $5,000, I continued, my anger slipping into my voice now. I need to know what's going on. Sullivan leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together as he studied me. For a moment, I thought he might deny everything, but then he sighed, as if dealing with a minor inconvenience. Your wife came to me about 2 months ago, he began, his tone measured. She wanted a discreet arrangement, something that wouldn't involve the courts or public records. I deal in unconventional agreements like this all the time. My stomach churned as I listened. This was real. He wasn't going to deny it. She said she wanted out of the marriage but didn't want the usual messy divorce, Sullivan continued. The $33,000 was her price. She wanted it quick and clean. As for the video, that was something separate, an offer made by a third party who found her appealing. They were willing to pay for her to star in it. She agreed. I could barely believe what I was hearing. My wife had reduced our entire life together to a cold transaction, a business deal. Why would she do this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sullivan shrugged. She didn't say much about her reasons. Just that she felt trapped, like the marriage wasn't fulfilling her anymore. Some people just snap, I suppose. I clenched my fists, trying to contain the rage boiling inside me. And you help people destroy their lives like this? I don't destroy anything, Sullivan said, his voice cold. I offer services that people willingly seek out. Your wife made her choices. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Lisa had signed away everything we had built together. For what? Money? Freedom? It felt surreal, like I had been living in a lie for years and had only just woken up. Who's the third party? The one paying for the video? I demanded, needing to know who else was involved in this mess. Sullivan hesitated, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of discomfort cross his face. I can't disclose that information, he said flatly. I slammed my fist on the armrest of the chair, anger surging through me. You've already destroyed my marriage. What more could you possibly hide from me? Sullivan stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. I suggest you speak to your wife about this, Mr. Peterson. That's where you'll find the answers you're looking for. I stood up too, my blood boiling, but I knew I wasn't going to get anything more out of him. As I left his office, I felt like the ground was slipping away beneath my feet. The truth was worse than I could have ever imagined, and yet, I still didn't have the full picture. When I got back to my car, I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. The image of Lisa signing that contract burned into my mind. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. Not until I knew everything. I had one more stop to make before I could face her and demand the truth. It was time to find out who had made that $5,000 offer. I sat in my car outside Greg Sullivan's office, the weight of what I had just learned pressing down on me like a lead blanket. The anger and confusion simmered beneath my skin, but there was still more I needed to uncover. Lisa's betrayal wasn't just about the money or the divorce. It went deeper, darker. I needed to know who this third party was, the one offering her $5,000 for the video. Someone out there had seen her as nothing more than a product to be bought, and she had agreed. As I started the car and drove back through the city, my mind raced. Who was this person? Was it the man I'd seen her with at the party? Was there someone else pulling the strings? I couldn't go back to her yet, not until I had all the pieces of this nightmare in front of me. I pulled into the driveway of my home, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Lisa's car was in the garage, meaning she was home. I needed to be careful now. One wrong move, one slip-up, and she'd know I was onto her. I couldn't afford that yet. When I stepped inside, the house was eerily quiet. Lisa was upstairs, I guessed, probably preparing for some routine errand or an evening yoga session. I needed to act fast. Slipping quietly into her home office again, I began searching for anything that might give me a clue as to who this third party was. My fingers sifted through piles of documents, old letters, and receipts. I was growing more frustrated by the minute, until I found it. At first, it seemed like just another business card, crumpled up and carelessly tossed into a drawer. But when I smoothed it out and saw the name printed on it, my stomach dropped. The card belonged to a man named Eric Connors. I didn't recognize the name at first, but there was a logo beneath it, a discreet emblem for an adult entertainment production company. The name of the company, Luxor Productions, sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a company I'd heard of, but the implications were clear enough. I turned the card over and found a handwritten note on the back. Call me about the upcoming shoot. Everything's ready. $5,000 on the table. No phone number, just the cold, impersonal words that sealed the deal. My mind reeled as I stared at the card. This was the man behind the $5,000 offer. He was the one Lisa had agreed to work with. For what? And for how long had this been going on? I didn't want to imagine the answers, but the questions burned in my mind nonetheless. Was this a one-time arrangement, or had she been selling herself to him for months? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. There was no denying it anymore. This was bigger than just a contract or a secret divorce. Lisa was tangled in something far more sinister, and this Eric Connors was at the heart of it. I shoved the card into my pocket, knowing I had to confront this man before I confronted her. If I went in blind, Lisa would find a way to twist the truth, and I wasn't going to let her get away with that. Just then, I heard footsteps upstairs. Lisa was moving around, getting ready for something. I couldn't let her see me here, rummaging through her things. I closed the drawer quietly and made my way back downstairs, acting like I had just come in. My heart pounded as I reached the living room, trying to mask the nervous energy coursing through my veins. Moments later, Lisa appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed in a casual outfit, her yoga mat slung over her shoulder. She smiled when she saw me, that same deceptive smile that had fooled me for so long. "Hey, I'm heading out to the gym," she said, her voice light and carefree. "You good for dinner later?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, sure. I'll pick something up." "Great," she replied, giving me a quick peck on the cheek before heading out the door. As soon as I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I let out the breath I'd been holding. I had to move fast now. I didn't know how much time I had before she caught on, but I wasn't going to sit idly by while my life crumbled around me. I grabbed my phone and searched for Eric Connors and Luxor Productions. It didn't take long to find their website, and my stomach twisted as I scrolled through the gaudy layout filled with glossy photos and promises of exclusive content. I clicked through a few pages until I found a contact section. Sure enough, Eric Connors' name was listed, along with a phone number and a generic email address. This was my shot. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew I had to speak with him to find out exactly what role he played in all of this. Without giving myself time to second-guess, I dialed the number. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "This is Eric," he said, his tone sharp and businesslike. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure of what to say. But I had come too far to back down now. "Eric, this is James Peterson. I'm Lisa's husband." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a momentary silence that made my pulse quicken. "James," he repeated slowly as if testing the name. "What can I do for you?" "I think you know exactly what this is about," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I found the card. I know about the $5,000 deal. I want to know what the hell you think you're doing with my wife." Another pause, but this time I could hear the tension crackling in the silence. When Eric spoke again, his tone was different. Less business, more caution. "Look, man, this isn't something you want to get involved in," he said, his voice low. "Lisa's a grown woman. She made her choices. And those choices involve selling herself to your company?" I snapped, anger rising in my throat. "You think I'm just going to sit here and let this happen?" "James," Eric said, his voice hardening, "I don't know what you think is going on, but this is business. Nothing personal. Lisa came to us with her own ideas. She's an adult, and she knew what she was agreeing to. If you want answers, you should be asking her, not me." "Who else is involved?" I demanded, ignoring his excuses. "Who made the offer? Who is she doing this for?" Eric sighed, as if he had dealt with angry husbands before and was already tired of the conversation. Look, I'm not at liberty to discuss client information. You'll have to take this up with Lisa. My advice? Don't drag this into something bigger than it needs to be. No one needs the drama. I clenched my fists, fury boiling inside me. I don't care about your advice. I'm not letting my wife destroy our marriage without answers. Then you better talk to her, he said, his tone dismissive. That's all I've got for you, James. Good luck. Before I could say anything else, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, frustration pulsing through me. Eric wasn't going to give me anything more, and Lisa wasn't home yet. But I was done waiting. Tonight I would confront her. Tonight the lies would end. The next few hours passed in a blur. I paced the house, my mind spinning with 1,000 scenarios of how this conversation would go. When Lisa finally walked through the door that evening, she had no idea what was about to hit her. She smiled as she set down her gym bag, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I'm starving, she said casually. Did you pick up anything for dinner? I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. We need to talk, I said, my voice low but firm. Her smile faltered, confusion flickering in her eyes. About what? I took a deep breath, every word heavy with the weight of what I now knew. About you. About Greg Sullivan. And about a man named Eric Connors. The color drained from her face immediately, her eyes widening in shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She knew. And now, there was no going back. The room seemed to shrink as Lisa stood there, frozen in place, her gym bag still hanging from her shoulder. The shock on her face was unmistakable, and for the first time in months, she wasn't in control of the situation. The mask she'd worn so effortlessly had cracked, and now, there was no hiding. The moment of truth had finally arrived. I watched her carefully, waiting for her to say something, anything, that might explain the contract, the deal with Eric Connors, the complete dismantling of our life together for a paltry sum of money and a degrading video. What are you talking about? She finally stammered, her voice weak, lacking the confidence she usually carried. Don't, I said, shaking my head. Don't even try to lie to me, Lisa. I've seen everything. The contract, the $33,000 deal for a divorce, the $5,000 for a porn video. I know about Greg Sullivan, and I know about Eric Connors. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For a second, I thought she might try to deny it all, to weave another web of lies, but she didn't. Instead, she just stood there, the weight of her actions visibly crashing down on her. Why, Lisa? I asked, my voice breaking. Why did you do this? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she dropped her gym bag to the floor. She slowly walked to the couch and sat down, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was suffocating. I don't know, she whispered, her voice muffled through her hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far. That's not an answer, I snapped, my frustration bubbling over. You don't accidentally sign a contract to divorce your husband for $33,000 and agree to sell yourself for a video. She lifted her head, her eyes red with tears. You don't understand. I felt trapped. I've felt trapped for so long, James. Our life, this marriage, it hasn't been what I wanted for years. I stared at her in disbelief. Trapped? Trapped how? We had everything, Lisa. I thought we were happy. She laughed bitterly through her tears. Happy? Really? You've been so wrapped up in your work, your routines, your own little world. You didn't even notice when I started drifting away. You didn't notice when I stopped loving you. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. Stopped loving me? I echoed, barely able to process the pain they caused. And this is how you decided to deal with that? By selling our marriage for money? Lisa wiped her tears, her voice shaking as she spoke. It wasn't about the money. Not at first. I wanted out, but I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared. Scared of the mess, of what it would do to you, to us. So when Greg Sullivan offered me a way to make it all go away quickly, I took it. I didn't think you'd ever find out. I shook my head, still unable to comprehend how the woman I'd loved for so many years could betray me so deeply. And the video? The $5,000. Her eyes flickered with guilt and she looked away. That wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't want to do it, Eric. He made me feel like it was the only way out. I didn't think you'd ever know. I felt sick to my stomach, disgusted by everything she had done. You agreed to it though. You signed the contract, Lisa. You made the choice. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks again. I know I did. And I'm so sorry, James. I never meant for it to come to this. I never wanted to hurt you. I took a step closer, my fists clenched at my sides, the anger threatening to boil over. But you did hurt me, Lisa. You destroyed everything we built together. For what? Some quick money? A way to escape. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. It wasn't about the money. I swear. I wanted to feel something again. Anything. Feel something? I spat. So what? You couldn't feel anything with me, so you decided to sell yourself to some sleazebag for a video? That's your excuse. She shook her head, sobbing quietly now. It wasn't like that. It wasn't just about the video. I felt dead inside, James. For so long, I felt like I was just going through the motions. The gym, the house, the dinners, it was all the same and I didn't know how to get out. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. I stood there, staring at her, my mind reeling. I had thought the worst part of this betrayal was the money, the contract. But now, hearing her talk about how she had felt nothing for years, how she had been quietly planning her escape, it shattered me in a way I hadn't anticipated. I loved you, Lisa, I said, my voice hoarse. I would have done anything for you. But instead of talking to me, instead of telling me how you felt, you went behind my back and made this disgusting deal. She didn't respond, just sat there, her body shaking with sobs. The silence between us was deafening, filled with all the things we could never take back. I couldn't look at her anymore. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, needing to put some distance between us. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing, to calm the rage and heartbreak coursing through me. How long have you been planning this? I asked, my voice quieter now. Lisa hesitated before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. 2 months. 2 months. For 2 months, she had been living a lie, pretending everything was fine while she plotted to end our marriage behind my back. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that she had been so willing to throw it all away without a second thought. Why didn't you just leave? I asked, still staring at the counter. Why didn't you just tell me you weren't happy? We could have talked about it. We could have figured something out. I was scared, she repeated, her voice shaking. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. I turned to face her again, my heart breaking all over. Well, congratulations. You hurt me more than I ever thought possible. We stood there in silence for what felt like hours. Finally, I spoke again, my voice hollow. What now, Lisa? What happens next? She wiped her face, her expression defeated. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what to do. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. We're done, Lisa. I can't forgive this. I don't know how to move past it. She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand. I'll be contacting a lawyer tomorrow, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. We'll sort out the divorce. But this is over. Lisa didn't argue. She didn't beg for forgiveness or try to convince me otherwise. She just sat there, broken, knowing that the damage was irreparable. I walked out of the living room, each step feeling like a final goodbye. There was no more pretending, no more hiding behind lies. The truth was out, and now, all that was left was to pick up the pieces of what remained of my life. As I stood at the front door, ready to leave the house that had once been our home, I glanced back one last time. Lisa sat on the couch, her face buried in her hands, crying quietly into the empty room. The woman I had once loved was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. I stepped out into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. And for the first time in months, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The cold air outside stung my face, but I didn't feel it. My mind was spinning as I walked aimlessly through the quiet streets, trying to grasp what had just happened. Lisa had betrayed me, and our marriage was over. Those were the facts. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there had to be something deeper, something still lurking beneath the surface. What had really pushed her to sign that contract? Why go to such lengths to destroy what we had built? I found myself at a small park near our home, sitting on a bench, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The silence of the night was broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me out of my thoughts. I pulled it out, half expecting it to be Lisa, but the name on the screen wasn't hers. It was Greg Sullivan. My heart skipped a beat. Why would the lawyer be calling me now? After everything that had happened, the last person I wanted to talk to was the man who had orchestrated the contract that tore my life apart. But curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Mr. Peterson," Sullivan's voice came through the line, steady and calm, as though this were just another routine call. "I have some new information that I think you'll want to hear." "What the hell do you want, Sullivan?" I snapped, my patience already worn thin. "Haven't you done enough?" He paused for a moment, then spoke again, his tone more serious. "You may not believe me, but I'm not your enemy in this. There are things about your wife's arrangement that you don't know. Things she didn't tell you." I stood up from the bench, adrenaline coursing through me. "What are you talking about?" "I can't go into details over the phone. Meet me at my office. Now." The last thing I wanted to do was face Greg Sullivan again, but something in his voice told me this wasn't a game. There was more to the story, and I wasn't about to walk away from whatever final truth he was holding. 20 minutes later, I was back at Sullivan's office. The same cold, impersonal building, the same receptionist, and the same unsettling silence as I walked down the hallway to his office door. When I entered, Sullivan was already seated at his desk, a file open in front of him. "Have a seat, Mr. Peterson," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I didn't sit. "What is this about? I don't have time for more of your games." Sullivan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in his lap. "This isn't a game. What I'm about to tell you might change everything you think you know." I stared at him, my anger barely contained. "Spit it out then." He opened the file and pushed it toward me. "I didn't tell you everything about the contract Lisa signed. There was another clause, one you didn't see." My stomach churned. "What clause?" Sullivan's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them that wasn't cold detachment. Was it sympathy? Regret? The $33,000 wasn't the whole deal. Lisa was offered a much larger sum, 3 times that amount, to do something else. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you saying?" "She didn't just agree to make the video. She was coerced into something bigger. The third party, Eric Connors, wasn't the real buyer. He was just the middleman." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Who's behind all of this?" Sullivan hesitated, then spoke the name that made my world tilt on its axis. "It's your boss, Robert Hastings." For a moment, I couldn't process the words. Robert Hastings, my boss, the man I had worked for loyally for years, was behind this? My head spun and I felt like I was going to be sick. "Hastings," I repeated, my voice shaking. "Why would he?" "He's been involved in these kinds of arrangements for years," Sullivan said, his voice steady. "I didn't know it at first when Lisa came to me. But once the money started moving, I realized who was pulling the strings. Hastings has a history of exploiting vulnerable women. He offers them money, just enough to make them feel desperate. And then he pushes them into doing things they'd never normally consider. Lisa was one of them. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Hastings had always seemed like a decent guy, strict but fair. How could he have been behind this? How could he have targeted my wife? "He's been watching you," Sullivan continued, "for years. He knew Lisa was struggling and he used that. The contract was just a way to get her out of your marriage so he could have her for himself." I sank into the chair, my mind racing. Hastings. Of all the people. I had never seen it coming. "She didn't tell you because she was scared," Sullivan said, his voice softening. "She thought she could handle it. But when Hastings made his final offer, when he pushed for the video, she panicked. That's when she signed the contract. She didn't want to do it, but she didn't know how to get out." I stared at the file in front of me, my entire world crumbling. Everything I had believed about Lisa, about our marriage, was unraveling before my eyes. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Because I was part of it, Sullivan admitted, his face unreadable. And I regret it. I didn't know how deep Hastings was involved until it was too late. But now that you know, you can stop him. You can take this to the authorities, or you can confront him yourself. I stood up slowly, my body trembling with rage. I had never felt this kind of fury before, not even when I found out about Lisa's betrayal. Hastings had used my wife, manipulated her, and turned her into a pawn in his sick game. I couldn't let that stand. Where is he? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Sullivan didn't hesitate. He's at the Hastings Tower downtown. He works late, often alone. I didn't say another word. I grabbed the file, turned on my heel, and walked out of Sullivan's office, the rage boiling inside me like molten lava. My mind was set. Tonight, I was going to confront Robert Hastings. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there, but I knew one thing for sure. He was going to pay for what he had done to my wife, to me, to everything I thought I knew. This wasn't over yet. The final reckoning was about to begin. The drive to Hastings Tower was a blur. My mind was spinning, a storm of rage, confusion, and disbelief swirling inside me. Robert Hastings, the man I had respected for years, the boss I'd admired, had orchestrated this nightmare. He hadn't just manipulated Lisa, he had used our entire marriage as a tool to satisfy his sick desires. The betrayal I had felt from Lisa now paled in comparison to the fury I harbored for Hastings. He had to pay. When I arrived at the towering glass building, it loomed ominously against the night sky. The lobby was nearly empty, except for a lone security guard behind the desk. I approached quickly, adrenaline driving every step. I need to see Robert Hastings, I said, my voice low but firm. The guard eyed me suspiciously. Mr. Hastings doesn't usually take visitors this late. I work for him, I snapped, my patience already wearing thin. It's urgent. The guard hesitated, but after a moment, he picked up the phone and made a quick call. Go on up, he said, nodding toward the elevator. He's in his office. I stepped into the elevator, my heart pounding louder with each passing floor. Hastings had no idea I was coming. He had no idea that his game was about to come crashing down around him. When the doors opened on the top floor, I was greeted by the quiet hum of a nearly empty office. Hastings' door was just ahead, slightly ajar, a dim light spilling out into the hallway. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, rehearsing the confrontation in my head. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. This was about justice. He needed to understand that he couldn't control people like pawns in his sick little game. I reached his office door and pushed it open without knocking. Hastings was sitting at his desk, his back to me, staring at the city lights through the large floor-to-ceiling windows. He didn't turn around when I entered. You've got some nerve showing up here after what you've done, I said, my voice cold, laced with fury. Hastings didn't flinch. He didn't even move. James, he said calmly, as if my presence was expected. I was wondering when you'd come. His composure only fueled my anger. You think this is just a game, don't you? I took a step closer, my fists clenched. You destroyed my marriage. You manipulated my wife. And you think I'm just going to let you get away with it? Finally, he turned around, his face calm and unreadable. Your wife made her choices, James. I didn't force her into anything. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You manipulated her. You took advantage of her when she was vulnerable. You made her sign that disgusting contract, and you pushed her into that video. Hastings stood up, straightening his tie, his expression still annoyingly calm. Lisa came to me. She wanted out of the marriage. I merely provided her with a solution. I stepped closer, my heart racing. A solution? You call blackmailing her into a porn video a solution? His eyes narrowed slightly, the first sign that my words had gotten under his skin. No one forced her to do anything, James. She was unhappy, and she made her own decisions. That's the truth. I felt the urge to punch him right then and there, but I held myself back, barely. You ruined her, I said through gritted teeth. You took her when she was vulnerable and twisted her into something she's not. Hastings let out a small, humorless chuckle. You give her too little credit. She knew exactly what she was doing. People make choices, James, and they live with the consequences. I stared at him, the full weight of his words settling in. It was clear now. He felt no remorse, no guilt for what he had done. To him, this was just another business deal, another transaction where people's lives were mere collateral. But then, as I stood there in his office, something clicked. Hastings was too calm, too collected. He had expected me to come here. He wasn't surprised by my arrival, and that made me wonder, was this part of his plan too? Was he baiting me into doing something reckless? I forced myself to take a breath, to think clearly. Hastings was dangerous, not because of his power, but because of his control. He thrived on manipulation, on pushing people to the edge and watching them fall. You think you've won, don't you? I asked, my voice quieter now, colder. You think this is over? Hastings raised an eyebrow. It is over, James. You've already lost. A slow, dark smile crept onto his face, and for the first time, I realized just how deep his control went. Hastings wasn't just manipulating Lisa, he had been manipulating me too. He wanted me to explode, to lose control, to make a move that would ruin me. He had played both sides from the very beginning. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. I wasn't going to be another one of his pawns. No, I said, stepping back, my mind clearing. I haven't lost. Not yet. Hastings watched me closely, his smile fading slightly. You're walking a fine line, James. I'd be careful if I were you. I turned toward the door, my heart still pounding, but my mind sharper now. You're right, I said as I reached for the handle. I do have to be careful. I walked out of his office, not bothering to look back. I knew what I had to do now. Hastings was too smart, too careful to take down without a plan. But he had one weakness, his arrogance. He thought he was untouchable, but no one was above the law. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the last few days hit me all at once. Lisa's betrayal, Hastings' manipulation, the shattered pieces of my life that I had to somehow put back together. But I wasn't alone in this. I still had the file Sullivan had given me, the documents that detailed Hastings' involvement in more than just my wife's life. There were other women, other victims. And now I had the evidence I needed to bring him down. I called Sullivan on the drive back, my mind racing with possibilities. I'm not going to confront him again, I said as soon as he picked up. I'm taking this to the authorities. Sullivan didn't hesitate. That's the smart move, James. I'll make sure everything is in order for when you do. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Hastings had underestimated me. He had expected me to lose control, to let my anger destroy me. But now I had the upper hand. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making sure that men like Robert Hastings never had the chance to hurt anyone else again. By the time I got home, Lisa was still sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes swollen from crying. Where did you go? She asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat down across from her, the file still in my hand. This isn't over yet, I said, my voice steady. I found out the truth. Her eyes widened slightly, and she looked away, as if she already knew what I was about to say. Hastings is behind everything, I continued. He manipulated you just like he's manipulated others. But now, I'm going to stop him. Lisa didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she whispered, I'm sorry. I didn't know if I could forgive her. Not yet, maybe not ever. But for now, there were bigger things at stake. As I stood up and walked toward the door, I looked back at her one last time. Get some rest, Lisa, I said. You'll need it. Everything is going to change. And with that, I walked out, ready to finish what had been started. The final reckoning was just beginning.